All right, so welcome everyone to this session of the NECI Professional Development Webinar Series. Today, I'm got the pleasure of introducing, I believe, are we going to have two speakers today, I believe?
It's
Uh,
just me, but Kendall will be around to support and will certainly be chiming in.
okay. Well, our speaker today is Dr. Scott, and if I say it wrong, forgive me, Hotaling.
That's correct. Yeah, a rare spot on pronunciation.
Scott's group studies I'm sorry, Scott's group studies how high mountain ecosystems are being affected by climate change with an emphasis on the cryosphere, a collection of Earth's frozen water with the aim to better understand the past, present, and future of biodiversity in these habitats. Scott also works with stakeholders, community partners, and the public to bolster climate resiliency in Utah and the Intermountain West. Prior to coming to Utah, Scott received his PhD from the University of Kentucky. He was also a postdoc for several years at Washington State University, where he continued his high mountain research. Today, he's going to be discussing a program at Utah that's called the Climate Adaptation Intern Program. Scott, welcome, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Dwayne. It was great to join these talks, I guess, for the first time a month or two ago when Dwayne presented, and it was also nice to hear that he was a fairly new climate resiliency specialist in Illinois. I think we started those positions at the same time, roughly. So I started at USU in August of 2022. And this is, I would say, the first big success from my time at USU. And that is in large part thanks to Kendall, who's also on this call. Everything about this program and the success and where it's gotten to in a pretty short amount of time is Kendall has been part of it every step of the way. And so while I'm the one talking, it certainly is very much a shared product that we're really proud of and excited to share. And this is the first forum where we've had a chance to really get this idea out in the world a bit more. So yeah, with that, I'll hop into the actual talk. So to give some context, I'm going to walk through essentially what the program is, how we fund it, how the logistics of how it works, why we created it, how we evaluate it, all these nuts and bolts things of maintaining something like this. But to avoid having to do kind of a long-winded just going through all the details, I want to give a quick overview of what the program is. And as I go along, I think Kendall's going to put some things in the chat, various links and things we want to check out stuff while I talk. And if there are questions, feel free to chime in. But basically, it's called the Climate Adaptation Intern Program. We shorten it to CAIP, which we pronounce CAIP for short. So the CAIP program, we started it in November of 2023, and that's like literally when we had the first idea of it and started talking about the need that we saw and how we could solve it in an efficient, scalable way, which I'll talk about more on the next slide. Our first cohort started that next semester in spring 2024, and we are now on our third cohort. It's a semester-long cohort-style program. So we have one cohort of interns each semester. We have 10 interns per cohort, 2 per academic year. And this is a unique part of it for sure. It's an hourly job. So the students are paid to do a job, which is producing extension resources. But we also got feedback in the first semester that they really wished they could get course credit for it as well. So we turn it into a class as well. So they register for a 3 credit hour class and they get paid for their job. So it's a job and a class. One intern produces one resource. This is typically a fact sheet. It's not a team collaboration style uh, program. And I say that only to the extent that each intern is responsible for their own product with help, of course, although there is a ton of interaction and team science elements to it, but it's not everyone working on one outcome. These resources are published via USU Extension, and we evaluate on a per cohort basis, pre and post, and then also longitudinally of the program. So I think it's good to start with the need. Why does something like this need to exist? And the main reason, there are kind of two big reasons, and I'll walk through the main, or the first one first, is that in a lot of situations when it comes to climate adaptation or climate mitigation or climate resiliency, we don't need more research. We don't need to go out and learn more about something. What's happening on the planet is pretty clear, and we often know what the solutions are. And in many cases, the challenge is more about synthesizing what's known and communicating that in a way that is approachable, locally relevant, those kinds of things. And so we really wanted to create a program that could bridge this gap between the body of work that's out there and getting it to people that can use it or make decisions or just be better educated because of it. And we really wanted this to be scalable. And so we could certainly sit down and Kendall and I could write a fact sheet and move along kind of slowly. But if we're writing one fact sheet together, that's pretty slow. But if we have a group of people writing fact sheets, 10 people writing 10 fact sheets is always going to be faster. And people may be skeptical of like that being true when we get undergrads in the mix who tend to not have a lot of experience. But I would still argue the 10 fact sheets that we write with the undergrads is faster than me trying to write 10 or a Kindle. So there still is an efficiency factor that is improved there. And then we wanted our solution to be able to respond to emerging needs. So we didn't want it to be this big, slow machine where it's like, oh, we started this project. It's going to last 2 years. We'll pick the next thing in 2 years and we'll see what happens from there. We wanted it to be pretty bite-sized. And so this kind of semester by semester timeline works really well. And so, for instance, with the wildfires in Los Angeles over the recent winter, that became a big topic of what people were discussing in Utah and what we were being asked about. And so we were able to very quickly have an intern work with experts to work on a fact sheet this semester right now about wildfire in urban settings in Utah and the climate change components. So we can essentially emerge to it, respond to a need within, months or weeks. And then we've also wanted, this is kind of the second big reason, we wanted to create opportunities for students to gain training for whatever career they're going to go into and take action on climate change. And so something that is, I think, very apparent to many of us is that there's a lot of climate anxiety among young people. And part of that anxiety, like when I was growing up, I'm kind of an anxious person. And my mom once said to me, the enemy of anxiety is action. So a great way to deal with your anxiety is to do something towards, fixing it. And so for a lot of students, like having an opportunity to actually do something about this thing that they're concerned about is really empowering and important for them. And the numbers of our applications thus far really bear this out. So we've had 223 applicants for 30 spots in the program. And these have come from every college that's applicable on campus. And we've hired interns from virtually all of those colleges as well, because we really want this program to be interdisciplinary. And we want to have business students learning from natural resource students and all of those different perspectives in the room. And so we're in Utah, and Utah is kind of viewed broadly as a red conservative state. And the reality is that people wouldn't look at Utah and think of that as being a great home for a climate adaptation intern program. And that very well may be true. It's where we are and where we think our program is particularly needed, although we certainly think it's relevant in other states and regions. But I want to walk through why we may have found some success in this perhaps unlikely place. And so we wrote a fact sheet recently about recent climate change in Utah over the last century or so, just to walk people through what is actually going on. But Utah is pretty great for this kind of thing because climate change is very visible here. And so the mean temperature in the state, like anywhere else that you want to look, has been steadily rising. But obviously, it's hard to detect a 0.4 degree Fahrenheit per decade trend in temperature. But what's not hard to detect or see in Utah is changes in snowpack. So Utah is a snow obsessed state. We get 90 to 95% of our water from seasonal snowpack. We have a massive ski industry. We actually, in our Salt Lake City airport, there's an entire baggage claim that is devoted to, there's a carousel that's devoted to skis. So people come to Utah for snow, and people in Utah really know about snow. And so over the statewide, there's been roughly a 16% decline in our snowpack since 1979. And that's largely because temperatures have gotten warmer and more of our total precipitation is falling as rain, whereas it used to fall as snow. And what's great about this snowpack decline component is that when I go out and I talk to someone who's been in Utah for 50 years and maybe has a very different view on climate change in the world than I do, if I, just talk about changes in Utah, they will say things unprompted like, yeah, when I was a kid, it sure used to snow a lot more than it does now. And that creates great opportunities to kind of bridge our communication gap a little bit. And so Utah is actually more receptive to some of these things than I think people would expect. But then there's also the component of broadly climate opinions in the nation. I think the US and conservative states and liberal states and wherever you want to look, I think there's more support for climate change policy, climate change actions, belief in climate change occurring throughout the country than people maybe realize immediately. And so another fact sheet that we worked on as part of the intern program is this one, just what do Utahns think about global warming and climate change? And so I sent this out to the NECI listserv a little while ago as a kind of an example of how to share some basic information about, states. And we used the data for this were largely from the Yale climate opinions maps. So those data are readily available by county and state level for the entire country. And Utah, like many states, the general majority agree that global warming is happening. And so Utah tracks about 4% behind the national average, which is 72% of respondents agree with that statement. It's 68 in Utah. And then that number, as it has for the nation, has been steadily rising in Utah. So there's the reception for this and the kind of potential for a program like this has been steadily gaining steam since roughly 2010 when it's been being tracked. And that number has risen from being in the low 50% to almost 70%. So a pretty large shift in 15 years that doesn't seem to be slowing down. And then also, Utah is an energy state. And so it's a sunny state. There's a lot of solar panels. There's a lot of energy development. There's a lot of extraction. There's a lot of just that kind of stuff. And so having this kind of energy-centric economy and an energy-centric state, I think, positions Utah well for being open to things like funding research into renewable energy. And that's one place where, like, the average Utahn, 68% of them believe global warming is happening. But funding research into renewable energy tracks beyond that in virtually every county, including in Grand County, where Roz McCann, who we were just talking about before we started, lives. 81% of people, it's a fairly rural place, are supportive of funding research into renewable energy. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in a place like Utah to have real change happen. And so beyond the need and the context, a question that we probably get within the first 5 minutes of every meeting is how in the world do you fund this thing? Because you have a faculty member, you have a coordinator, you're paying 20 interns hourly every year. That's a lot of people and money to make this thing operational. And that's true. So the approximate cost, we don't want to sugarcoat these. are about $4,000 per intern. So for a year and 20 interns, that's about $80,000. I actually think that's a pretty good bang for our buck to be training 20 undergraduates every year and producing not 20 resources and fact sheets. We're never going to have a 100% success rate from a program like this, but we're pretty confident that a 75% success rate is a good number to hit. So we think this is actually a fairly efficient way to accomplish this. And the breakdown on a per intern basis, that's certainly not all their wages. The actual wages for the interns themselves, they work about 14 weeks at roughly 5 or 6 hours a week on their job. Their wages end up being about $1,250 for the period. But then the coordinator wages, where we have worked out that Kendall spends about 40 hours per intern working with them directly over the course of not only the period where they're employed during the semester, but then also the kind of finishing period afterward, which we'll talk about. Those wages certainly add up quickly. And then there's some oversight of the program and other costs, but we've got it to where it's a pretty efficient operation, but it's still $80,000 a year is not trivial, especially not when, you know, all sorts of grants and things are being cut or limited or whatever else is going on. And so we fund this through multiple streams. So the obvious one is external grants. This all started from a USDA grant that is called the Secure Water Future Project. It's a USDA NEFA grant that I'm a co-PI on. And so that's where we got the kind of seed money to really kick CAIP off. And then we've had great luck with internal grants. USU Extension gave us a very generous seed grant as well to conduct about a year of this program and to offset a lot of the costs. And then we've been developing, one of our kind of main goals is we don't want to be tied to grant cycles, or we want to be tied to them as little as possible, because grants end. And a very common theme that I've seen in my career is there's a big grant, there's a lot of resources, a thing gets off the ground, it's really effective, everyone wants it to continue to exist, but then that grant goes away and there's not a great way to sustain it after that. So we're really trying to work on the sustainability of this program. And the way we're doing that is trying to find revenue streams that are recurring. And so an example of one of these is an organizational partnership where at USU and Extension, we have an eco center called the Swanner Preserve and Eco Center. They have an endowment and they have goals for their programming and their center that align with the stuff that we're doing with CAIP. And so with them, we've developed a partnership where they will support financially 2 interns per year, and the interns complete CAIP. Then they go on to an environmental leadership summer internship at the Eco Center, which is in Park City, Utah. And so by doing that, I mean, if we can keep that partnership going, which the plan is for it to continue indefinitely, then we've now found 2 of our 20 slots are covered via this recurring relationship. So we now need 90% of that total funding, not 100%. And then we've also had great luck with faculty partnerships. Those are certainly more tied to grant cycles, but someone who many of you, I'm sure, know, Patrick Belmont. He's a professor in my department. He was the department head actually when I was hired. Patrick had a grant working on wildfire and reservoirs and sediment influxes following wildfires and, you know, the kind of climate change context of all that. And so he had some extension goals and resources that he wanted to produce as part of that existing grant. And so Patrick supported 2 interns last semester to work on those aims. And so we partnered with Patrick, linked him to these interns. We all worked together and produced those products. And so that offset the cost of the program. It checked the box of things that Patrick needed to accomplish for his grant, and it gave opportunities for those students. So those are really effective. And so, you know, we've written up some template text for faculty to write CAIP into their external grants as part of their broader impacts. And so things like that we're always looking for. And then more recently, I've been working on creating an endowment for CAIP. Um, Obviously, having an endowment that would produce $80,000 a year, if you know endowment finances, you need about 4% a year is what you're going to get from the capital. That would be an extraordinarily large endowment. So we aren't expecting to be able to offset all of the costs, but any amount that we can get into an endowment that creates annual revenue offsets that total cost of the program. And so the way we identify needs is multifaceted, and it's not like a very clear formal process, and we don't want it to be. But we do a few different things. So Kendall and I are both PhD scientists. We've done, dissertations and written papers. So we can do our own program research, and we know how to read sources and track down information and keep an eye on emerging trends. And so we do our own reading of popular press, locally and nationally, of a good idea of something that we think might be a good project for an intern. We keep an eye on emerging literature. Things like the National Climate Assessment. We talk to folks, and we put all these ideas into a big database we have of just, this is a potentially good idea. These are people that appear to be experts in that realm, because obviously Kendall and I can't be experts in all of these different disciplines, from energy to biodiversity to water, et cetera. Then we also talk to outside experts. And so I'm lucky to be part of USU Extension, where there are dozens and dozens of specialists statewide, county extension agents, all in different, with different expertise. So we work with those people to also, we've surveyed them formally. We've, just had water cooler type chats about things. And so we get a lot of ideas from them. I'm a co-PI on the Southwest Climate Adaptation Science Center, which has both a university and USGS component. I've asked for input from those folks about topics that should be worked on. And then we use various surveys and assessments that are already out there that either we produce, so things like needs assessments, and then ones that, like this Utah Wellbeing Survey, which is conducted by Courtney Flint at USU. Looking at this, the number one concern for Utah respondents to the survey is a concerns related to water supply. And so that makes it easy to know that, having some of our interns working on water supply is a good use of our time, and is fitting a need that Utahns are worried about. So one of the things we really want to avoid is just doing things to do them and not being able to articulate well why we're doing a specific project and devoting resources to it. And so then another question that we get is just, why fact sheets? And in an extension context, I don't think it needs a lot of justification, because we all are pretty aware that they're a very effective tool for communication. But one thing I'll note up front is that it doesn't have to be fact sheets. That's just our default. And it's our default for a lot of reasons, which I'll get into. But if the need calls for a certain kind of map that brings data sources together, or a lesson plan, or something like that, we're very open to interns not doing fact sheets. We just start there because that's the most kind of tractable approach. But we chose fact sheets because they're well suited to synthetic research information sharing. That's their entire point, is to share information in an approachable way for the audience that's being targeted, and also to get away from the peer-reviewed kind of ivory tower paywalls. This is supported by research. So this is a nice paper that was published, I think, about 10 years ago, that many of you might already be aware of, where this group surveyed water managers about how they would like to learn about water issues. And the group identified fact sheets as the top choice for how they would prefer to receive that information. It's also a very tractable format for students. So we're taking students from, in many cases, like never done anything like this, to creating a professional product. And fact sheets don't require knowledge of GIS or, data science or other things. Writing is not easy, but Kendall has a background in science writing and teaching science writing. So she's an excellent teacher to bring them up to speed on communicating their science effectively in the written form. So for us and our kind of setup, it's a very tractable thing to bring them all through. And then, yeah, it's highly effective, as many things have pointed out. So what does this look like? So I'll walk you through a cohort of how the timeline and how it all kind of works out. So this is for, say, the spring semester that we're in right now. So in October, we'll put out a campus-wide call for applicants. We post this as an hourly position on our internal student hiring website. And because we get so many applicants, so 80, 90 per cohort, we certainly can't interview 80 or 90 students. So we've designed a pre-interview survey. So we actually have a two-stage interview process for this, which is kind of wild for an hourly undergrad position. But so we have this pre-interview survey and we have students fill it out, and it just has like, we ask them for some basic background about what they've done, what they want to do, what they're interested in, what topics they might be interested in working on. And this serves two functions. One, it tells us who's actually interested versus the ones that just kind of threw in a resume and don't really want to do it. And it also gives us a chance to start screening out, like, who are these people? What is the mix of different points in their career, freshman versus senior, different places, on campus, different colleges. We can start targeting that mix of a really diverse group that we want. And then we do in-person interviews. These are short 15 to 20-minute chats. We do them all on the same day, and we hire interns soon after that. And so by the end of the year, we've got our cohort set. And a big part of the hiring depends on their availability, because we have a shared weekly meeting that everyone attends, Kendall, myself, all the interns. And so getting 10 undergrads in the same place for 90 minutes every week is its own challenge. And so for many of the interns that are really strong candidates, they don't get selected because their schedule doesn't work out. And so we encourage those interns to apply again in the future. And it can take, a couple rounds of applying before you actually have all the stars align for being in the program. And so then in January, we really kick off and the program starts, and we start with some background learning about climate change. I've put the syllabus to the right, but we're happy to share things like that. And then we do a pre-participation survey, which I'll talk more about the results of that later. Then we move into some background about writing and research and getting information from sources. And this is also where we connect students to outside experts. So a really important part of the program is we make it bigger than me, Kendall, and the interns. We connect every intern to 1 to 3 outside experts in the discipline that they are working on, because ultimately these have to be professional, high quality, science-based, accurate products. And the experts, they come in at the beginning of the process and they meet with the intern and they give them kind of like, here are what I think the big points are and like the stuff to not miss and maybe some resources. Then they also come in at the end and they give a check on the ultimate on the resulting fact sheet. And what we really want from that kind of final check is like, does anything in this raise your eyebrow as not being accurate or being, something that's going to cause, some kind of stress in the community that we're trying to support. So that's been really effective for us and the program and the interns. And then we really dig into drafting the products over a couple months in March and April. And then we conclude the last day with the post-participation survey and also a pizza party, which I didn't put on here, which the interns really like. And then the interns are done. Their period in the program has ended, and they go off into whatever else they're going to do. But our work isn't finished. So what we have done is we've created some really great drafts during the period of the program. But then Kendall and with my help wherever as much as I can and the experts, Kendall mainly finalizes the products and goes through and does fact checking, solicits that input on the finished products from the experts, and really kind of finalizes them for publication. Then we publish them typically around July. and then our next cohort starts in August. What we've learned from this is that from the fall to the spring, there's not really much chance to finish the products. And this is our first time where we've actually had the two cohorts back to back. So we'll be finishing things from the fall and spring this summer. And that's going to be really like summer is going to be our period for getting the products out there and then getting geared up for the next year. And so we evaluate the program via an IRB approved protocol, and we evaluate it in two stages. So we have a pre-post experience evaluation, just focus on the 13 weeks they're in the program. This is a quite long for an extension intervention with the students. So we're also just kind of curious academically how impactful a 13-week intervention is versus like, a 1-day workshop or something like that, although we're not specifically testing that. And then we have a longitudinal component where we are surveying them every 6 to 12 months indefinitely. And so for the pre and post, we have a few kind of basic goals. We want to know what was the impact on various skills and learning outcomes and things that we were curious about. And then we want feedback on the program that we can use for improving it. And then on the longitudinal side, one of our main questions is just, did it stick? Did whatever changes we saw at the 13-week mark, are those still present, 1 or 2 years on? And then we also really want to know where the interns take the experience and what career paths they're in and how they're maybe using things they learned in CAIP to, go on to other things. Like one of our interns from last semester used CAIP as a springboard to get an energy policy internship in Washington, D.C. for this coming summer. And so that's the kind of stuff that we love to see them using that. Like that student worked on a solar power energy storage project. And so they really were able to kind of bolster that career goal within CAIP and then use the experience to get farther along in what they're trying to accomplish. So some fun part that's, a bit easier to see some impacts. So by the numbers, we've had 3 cohorts so far. 28 interns will have completed the program by the end of April, so by the end of this month. We've published 10 fact sheets and 1 lesson plan, and we have tons more that are nearing publication in various forms. This is the 10 we've published so far. I won't read through all the titles, but they're energy, water, some just basic information about climate change in the state, policy, that kind of thing. So we're really hitting on a lot of different areas. And then something that's pretty exciting is our recent climate change in Utah fact sheet is actually going to be in modified form the introduction to a chapter on climate adaptation in Utah's Wildlife Action Plan for the next decade. So we really want to see these products be used. And we want to see legislators and managers and city planners and whomever, read these things and integrate them into whatever planning documents and other efforts that they're doing. And so we've had 1,900 downloads of the articles since June 2024 when we published our first one. So in less than a year, this is what it looks like for the 10. They're all steadily gaining downloads. A couple of them are gaining faster than others, as you can probably tell. These ones that hit on basic information that's kind of widely applicable are certainly resonating with a larger crowd, which isn't surprising. Like our recent Utah climate change opinions fact sheet. I mean, we published that in late February, and it's already been downloaded 300 times in 5 weeks or something. And then kind of downloads per month, that's steadily increasing as well. We had our biggest month of downloads this past month, so in March 2025. And that's not surprising considering, we've been adding more and more products along the way. In June 2024, we only had 1 fact sheet that could be downloaded. These downloads are coming from all over the world. It's great to see they're concentrated in North America and the Western US where we're trying to have the most impact, but it's cool to see that, Europe and Asia and South America and, people in many places are reading them. And so our evaluation, I'm not going to go through all of it, I'll hit some highlights, but we essentially ask before and after self-reported change in a few different competencies or agreement with statements. And a lot of these statements, we're actually pulling the language from things like the Yale Climate Opinion Survey because we want to be able to have apples to apples data for our, group of people versus, more general public. But so for all of these, I'm going to show the before and the after, and this is across the two cohorts that have completed the program so far. So I think this is 18 interns. And then these are organized from the most impact at the top to the least so far at the bottom. And so for this one, the highest impact that we see is I've made a positive contribution to addressing global warming in Utah. So this has jumped from 3.1 to 4.3. We love to see that because that kind of hits on one of those goals that we're trying to accomplish, which is giving students an outlet for making an impact. Creating a product that effectively communicates is a close second. Students report that they have learned an incredible amount about writing, thanks to Kindle, which we're very confident is going to serve them well no matter what they do. And then kind of going on down the list, they improve their understanding of climate change, their ability to find sources, extract information from those sources, etc. The one thing that doesn't really change pre and post is their agreement with this statement. I want to make a positive contribution to addressing global warming. That went from 4.9 to 5. So they started out wanting to do that and they still want to do that at the end. So that's a nice kind of check on everything. And then one note that we also ask about, I mean, we ask more than just these kind of competency or statement questions, but we also ask them we give them this statement, ask their agreement with, I can only participate because I am paid for my time. And 63% of our interns agree with that statement. And we think that's very important because one of our goals for this is that we don't want this to be just an experience that students that have the ability to volunteer their time can participate in. We want this to be as open and kind of reachable for as many students as possible. So what are our next steps is the last couple slides. One of our main goals is starting to share our approach to support similar programming at other places. So that's one of the big reasons why we wanted to give this presentation and put these slides together. We hoped to have an article submitted to the Journal of Extension before this presentation, describing the program, including all of the resources, the syllabus, whatever worksheets and stuff that we use to actually run the program. That paper is almost done. It's entirely my fault that it isn't submitted, but it will be submitted probably this week. We're happy to share all of that. We'll have all the resources in it, and everything will be free. And all we will ask for from anyone that wants to replicate this program or implement it in some way is just credit to USU Extension. And then also just to keep us apprised as much as possible of what people are doing with it, because we'd love to be able to know how it's going and keep track of where it's taking place. And then we're working toward long-term stability and visibility of the program. And this is things like developing those partnerships. Another one that we're working on is with Utah's new forest restoration initiative. We're hoping that will be the kind of thing where we have recurring support for interns to work on shared goals. We're going to host a community engagement event in Park City in 2025, where we're actually going to essentially turn CAIP into an exhibit, where we'll have posters and students there, and we'll talk about the program and really try to get people from the community involved with it, have them just know about it. That'll be a great avenue for things like fundraising for the endowment, that kind of thing. And then we're trying to build CAIP into long-term plans for the college and USU Extension, and really trying to capitalize, and I mean that in the best way possible, on this interest among the undergrads in climate adaptation work. You know, higher education is certainly in a challenging time right now. We've been talking about the enrollment cliff for a while, independent of changes in the federal government. And so I think shifting and you know, staying with the times of what students are motivated to participate in can be a pretty powerful thing for everyone. And so I had this question for the group, which there are only a few of us, so it might not be as effective as I was hoping, but still, one question that I had was, does anyone in this group know of similar programs or efforts that we should be aware of? We would love to basically highlight them, cite them, talk to them, you know, make sure that we're spreading this message as equitably and visibly as we can for all of the various things that are happening. So yeah, please put them in the chat, send us an email, whatever. Kendall will track those down. And then yeah, that's all that I had. So any questions or comments, email either one of us, both of us, ask them now. We would love to talk more about this program with any of you. So thanks.
Thanks, Scott. That's some great information. And to me, I think it's something that, and I do see that there's at least one other site, Penn State, where they're doing something somewhat similar, but I think this could be replicated in many different locations. We'll go ahead and open it up for folks. If they have questions, just go ahead and unmic and or unmute and ask away.
Scott, I have a couple.
Go ahead.
Okay, mine's pretty simple, my first question, but for the fact sheet work that you're doing with the interns, and first of all, I'll just say it was great to learn more about your program. I obviously knew some of it being at Utah State, but I didn't know the depth from what you presented today. I'm just curious, with working with them on fact sheets, do you help them then in the translation of putting that on their resumes as part of their selling point in applying to jobs? It's a super basic thing, but I found it really helpful when I work with undergrads on service learning projects to walk them through that. What could that look like on a resume? How do you, cite with APA or whatever citation style and use that as a selling point in applying for jobs?
I'll let Kendall hop in. I think she would be. Kendall's the person who the interns in Kendall are very close after this experience, and she's the one that really kind of they go to her for a lot of these kinds of day-to-day things. Though you might still be muted.
I was responding to some things in the chat, and so I didn't have a full comprehension of the question. So I don't know if you want to begin a little bit, Scott, and then I can.
Yeah. So Roz was just asking if we actually kind of finish the job a bit and help them use their experience and their product they produce, like putting it on their resume and using it to help them get jobs. My sense is that we don't do that directly, although we should certainly remind them to do that, and we should we mention that they should, and we highlight that one of the things they get out of this is a lead author product that they can show that they can synthesize and do this work. We do write a lot of letters for the interns. I think we've written like 4 or 5 letters for 18 interns at this point. So that's kind of one of the biggest ways we help them in that way. But yeah, Kendall, what do you have to add?
Yeah, I guess just one thing I'll add to that is when interns email me to ask them to write a letter, I'll usually ask them to meet with me to kind of brainstorm what exactly they want to be in the letter. And during that time, we'll kind of talk about like what all the application includes, and then like which things they can highlight from the program if they'll be relevant. So there's a little bit of opportunistic mentorship in that way. But it's not necessarily part of the program. It's sort of like something that they might have to initiate by saying, I want you to write me a letter.
The question I wanted to ask, thank you for this. This was really exciting to learn about it sounds like we encounter very similar challenges and opportunities in working in this sort of space with students and producing deliverables for real life community partners out there and doing so with students. My question is so the program that we run at Penn State, it's focused on mitigation. We're doing greenhouse gas emissions inventories for the communities and then helping them implement emissions reductions type plans. So it's a little bit different in that regard. We do ours over 2 semesters, and we require students to do both the fall and the spring. And I'm wondering, I think you said that yours is a single semester. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you've given any thought, if the student interest would be there. It sounds like you get a ton of qualified applicants. You know, do you think you could run it more often, or that you would want to have it be an extended 2-semester opportunity in the future? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, Kendall can chime in too. I think part of that is that we do it over 2 semesters. One, so the commitment's lower, and it's kind of easier to make it happen. Or we do it over 1 semester because the commitment's lower versus 2 semesters. And then we also, I think it's a way to give more opportunities. There's no way we could have it be a cohort if we had 20 students in the room, I think, at once. And our first cohort, we actually split it into 2 groups. We actually had 12 interns. We did 6 and 6. And we really didn't like that because they didn't get the cohort experience that we really wanted them to have. And so that's one aspect, but it could certainly be longer. We couldn't run it more often, I don't think, without a lot more help. We're a little bit maxed out. But yeah, Kendall, what do you think about some of those details?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like from what I've observed with like the nature of the projects that they're doing, I generally feel like they're like interested in their topic for the span of the semester. And then I feel like at that point, they kind of want to like move on to the next thing. That said, we have had people apply to do the program again who have already completed it once, to maybe write about a new topic. And we're actually working, one of the students who's taking it this spring was in the first cohort in spring 2024. And so we kind of wanted to see what that felt like, to have somebody do it for the second time. So I think that's one thing that we're definitely interested in exploring. It's just tricky because we have so many applicants, and so we don't want to fill all the slots with people who have done it already.
Yeah, and I think just an important part of all this is like everything is still on the table for us. Like we've done this is our 3rd time. And so we're hoping this will happen for a long time. And so we're constantly evaluating like how could we do it better or what works better, and honestly, like maybe a question we add to our post survey this time is, would you have preferred if this was 2 semesters or longer? Do you feel like it's too short? That kind of thing. Because we kind of just settled on a semester because that felt the most approachable at the beginning. But it's exciting to have questions like this. And I felt like we maybe weren't quite ready to give a talk like this, but decided we should just go ahead with it. And part of that was like, I want more people to know about it, and I want to hear other ideas and like, have that ability to have feedback and those discussions that will improve it long term for sure. Yeah, so there's a question in the chat about what do we think is driving the interest? Yeah, I guess I don't. I mean, I think for the most part, it's twofold. It's one, the students are just really motivated to do something about climate change. And like all the in-person interviews, I mean, they all talk about like, this is a big problem. We aren't doing enough. I have this connection to this issue, and they just want to know more, or they know something about it and want to work more on that. And then the other aspect, I think, is just it is a paid job where they are able to further their career. And so I would be curious to talk more about like how you all are setting it up and maybe learning why we're getting a lot, and maybe it's the paying them, which we are really committed to. I'm as the financial most financially responsible person for the program. I am nervous about that long term. But I'm going to keep trying to do it as long as we possibly can, because it is such an important thing for just like equity and getting the students that can really like make an impact. And just the course thing, like I am fine with it not being a course. I am less fine with it not being paid. The course sort of just came because that was what students wanted. Um, and so, yeah, Scott, hop in.
That was fast. I was gonna put my hand down, but you caught it. Dang it.
Yeah.
Good to see you. Thank you for being here and sharing this exciting work. I can't believe what you guys have done so fast. I mean, that is a massive amount of work. Congratulations and thrilling. And I'm just really, I've worked hard over a lot of years of shifting this notion of what is an expert to community and place-based endeavors. And a lot of times, particularly in RU programs like research experience for undergrads and those kinds of heavily funded scenarios, it's often sort of like the new ground is moving to cross interdisciplinary, et cetera, et cetera. And I wonder if, given your colleagues and your process, I'm pretty excited. I bet you thought a lot about this and are doing this, but that notion of shifting this notion of expert away from the science exclusively faculty in those ways, but elevating that with practitioners, stewards, community leaders, all experts, and that is sort of broadening that notion of teaching and training place-based adaptation. And just thought I'd throw it out there.
Yeah. We have one of our primary goals is getting outside of USU with those experts. We love our USU experts. We love our colleagues. They're great. But some of our best connections are when we have, the person working for a city that's a city planner and is one of the experts working on, some kind of aspect of this. And so our biggest challenge, I think, right now, and maybe Kendall, you can agree or disagree with this, maybe if you want to add anything, is just we're still ramping up who all those experts are and trying to develop that network. And we're trying to be really intentional about whenever we run across people, or like honestly, when I read a Salt Lake Tribune article, I will send Kendall a name and be like, let's add this person to our list. This sounds like someone that might be great for a future like CAIP expert. And so, but yeah, we don't want the experts to only be what society recognizes as like science experts. We think there's obviously a much broader and often more relevant area of expertise with the people that are on the ground trying to solve some of these issues.
Oh, thank you. And I don't mean to in any way undermine the conventional or traditional experts. It's just elevating more place-based and deeply rooted. And I think you're in an amazing time right now that's so formative that is a good time to start sort of benching in that and sort of, for empowering your own pathways in those ways. And I just love, Scott, that I'm sort of crossing your paths more often these days and
Yeah.
Just blown away by it's just such exciting work. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, thank you.
Other questions? We have a few minutes left.
Screenshot the chat, which might make a noise, but that's easier than trying to write all this wonderful stuff down.
Scott, just brainstorming here with you, but we have a pretty strong marketing team within Extension, and there's some great videographers like Bronson Tykert. And I'm curious if you've thought about, first of all, doing what you're doing is incredible without a whole team of faculty helping you through this effort. I'm blown away as well. I'm just wondering if there's a way to involve Extension marketing so it wouldn't be another responsibility on your shoulders, but involve them in helping some of the students turn their fact sheets into a short video for the public and something for social media that you wouldn't need to do all the editing and everything, have them do that, and maybe some funds could go towards that, or they could do that pro bono. But have you thought about that as a potential different avenue for outreach that's even more accessible to a lot of the public, especially younger generations?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, looks like you're doing this. Okay.
So we started, one of our interns last semester had done like some short video marketing and wanted to help us and think about some of that. And I do some YouTube stuff for my mountain research. And so we started making some short YouTube videos. We have a channel called Utah Adapts, and we haven't really gotten it off the ground, but we 1,000% agree that it's such a good additional pathway. Like his first video got watched like 2,000 times across Instagram and YouTube. And it was just like, that's a bunch of new people that are interacting with this topic for even just a minute. And it has good science-based information. And so, yeah, there's a lot of different threads that we want to pursue. And that's one of them. We're trying to kind of just prioritize like what is the most impactful part to keep this thing alive. And then I would love to see more people and more resources as we kind of get some of those partnerships. But yeah, bringing in other folks would be very helpful on the video side of things. I'm a terrible video editor.
Perfect. Yeah, get some help from marketing. The very last question is about the policy side of things. So we have an interesting situation in Utah right now with the state legislature. This is a really bad year for academia, especially in Utah. And I'm just curious, I know we have to walk a fine line between advocacy and education. Have you thought about having the interns present to policymakers on Day of the Hill or anything like, or Day on the Hill, any events like that where that are translating this information directly to our policymakers?
Yeah, I think we would be very open to that. We haven't been asked to do it. Honestly, I'm still pretty new to USU, so I don't actually even know how you get into that. So figuring that out is an important aspect too. And we've struggled with we make sure to be clear to the interns that this is not an advocacy group. We're pulling information together and we are sharing it. Factually, we aren't pulling punches, but we aren't directing punches. We're just saying what's happening in the most objective way possible. But we also there's some nerves, I think, among us and the interns of just are we going to get in trouble for doing this kind of thing? Is this going to get a bullseye kind of put on our program or on me or on Kendall? And basically the way we're approaching that is we're just going to keep doing what we're doing until someone tells us not to, or until we can't do it anymore. And so we don't want to preemptively censor ourselves or stop doing it. But at the same rate, we do want to be sensitive we don't want to cause unnecessary harm, especially harm that would shorten the life of the program. Because as we were talking about before, I think we kind of got going, the vision for this is much longer than an administration. So I'm hoping that, this in 10 years, it's there were some challenging times, but look at all the good things that happened because of it. So I try to also be careful not to get too worried about what's happening right now, even though there are a lot of issues, to put it lightly. So I know we've had some that we've dealt with internally that, yeah, are not ideal.
All right, we are at the top of the hour. So Scott, Kendall, thank you both again. Great.
Yeah, thank you all.
And hopefully everybody has a good rest of the week, and we will hopefully see you all again soon. Thanks.
That sounds good. Thanks, Dwayne.